Hi, I'm Whitney Espich, the CEO of the MIT Alumni Association, and I hope you enjoy this digital production created for alumni and friends like you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. I am Winking Wong, MIT class of '84, founding president of the MIT Chinese Alumni Group. We wish to thank our co-sponsor, the MIT Club of Puget Sound, in particular, the Vice President of Program, Kevin Sham, MIT class of 19. Thank you too to Microsoft Corporation for providing the room for our in-person presentation at Redmond, Washington, and former MIT Club of Puget Sound President Lola Bryan and COVID-WA co-founder Dan Morris. Thank you, Kevin, Dan, and Lola, for making the in-person aspect of these events happen. Today's topic is 3 million served in 4 months. We are pleased to present Josh Hu and Darren Lim, who co-founded COVIDWA.com, the Washington COVID vaccine finder that served 3 million in 4 months. Josh is MIT class of '89, Bachelor of Science in Computer Science and Engineering. Darren is an MIT student, class of '23. Josh will tell you more about himself right after this introduction. So I want to give a shout out to Darren, who is amazing. Get this, while he was still a sophomore at MIT, Darren built the basic structure of COVID-WA and was one of the technical leads on the massive project. As president of the MIT Chinese Alumni Group, people often ask me about how older or retired technical or corporate professionals may stay relevant, compete with the younger generations, or join a startup, and how college students or recent graduates may get their start in the industry and startups. Asians of all ages also face many difficult challenges in the corporate and technical worlds. The pandemic further heightens anti-Asian hate. Josh and Darren's story provides an answer, among many, about how the different generations may complement one another to achieve what each cannot achieve alone, and how they can create new opportunities for themselves, even in the worst of times. Of course, there is also the beautiful story of struggling immigrants helping to make this country stronger and safer. So we are proud to present this webinar. After Josh's presentation, Darren will join Josh for a discussion and then a Q&A session. You may start typing your questions into the Q&A box now. You may also upvote the questions that you like. We welcome your participation. And here is Josh.
Thank you very much. Hold on a second. I've got an audio problem here. Thank you very much for that introduction, and especially for talking about how I ended up here today, because when I first got the invitation to speak at this group, I went to the website and I looked at, I got to turn off something here. I looked at the videos that were up there, and there's a fantastic set of videos, everything from generals, from flying tigers, to police captains, to captains of industry, and I am frankly none of those things. But when I talked to Wing-King Moore, I realized that what she was looking for was someone that could really connect with a broad range of audience, everybody from a high school student who wants to get into MIT, to college students who want to get involved in a project, to people who are currently working, to retirees who may be 20, 30 years out of date and may think that they have nothing to offer. But I want to assure everybody that every single one of those groups of people can get involved in a project like this. And in fact, this project really required all of those people to come together and work to solve the problem. I want to say hi to my friend Darren. Darren, are you there?
Yeah, hello.
Yeah, unfortunately, I got a bit of an audio problem here, so I can't hear. But Darren, I wanted to ask, what was your perceptions, overall perceptions of the project? Did you all also feel like all those groups needed to come together?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think everyone played a really good role in making this thing happen.
Okay, great. So now at this point, I'm going to start my screen share. And Darren, can you see that okay?
Yep.
All right. So as I mentioned, we're here to talk about this project COVID-WA that Darren and I helped start. And I'm going to first talk about what is COVID-WA. And I'm going to give you a layout. What was the scenario that required COVID-WA? And I'm going to talk about what we did. And I'm going to talk about the reactions to it. And then I'm going to talk about the aspects of Darren and I. How did we get to this point where we could help in this project? And I'm going to talk about some of the Asian themes as well as alumni themes from an MIT's perspective. And then we're going to talk about the origin story of COVID-WA after Darren and I started it and how it really grew to be a big project. And then I'm going to talk about some of the successes of the project as well as failures. And finally, I'm going to pass the baton on to you because really the goal of this talk for me is to try to help and inspire and empower somebody out there, maybe just one person who will go forward and take on a project like this, or maybe help volunteer and join a project. So what was COVID-WA? If you think back to February of 2021, you probably saw a lot of lines in the media of people standing waiting to get their COVID vaccines. And at that time, there was a very large demand and very low supply. And at that time, only the elderly and the disabled were allowed to get the vaccines. And in the middle of the supply and demand was the internet. That was the only way that most states were allowing people to book their vaccines. I want to show you the website the Department of Health created. It's a very simple to use website, and that was certainly one of the advantages. Just type in your zip code and you get a list of websites, and you can just click on any of those websites. The problem is that it didn't tell you whether anything was available. So you would go to the website, have to fill in 1 to maybe 5 pages of information, and then find out, no, it's not available. Rinse and repeat hundreds of times on that site and other sites. One of my COVID-WA founders said that she had dozens of tabs open and she would just keep on refreshing over and over and over again. So in the middle of this problem, a bunch of us volunteers got together and we created a new website. The news media, though, had seized on this and was printing some really awful headlines like Seattle area residents tell of massively frustrating efforts and demand floods the Washington health systems. So we came together and we formed this new project called COVID-WA. And immediately you can see that this is a very different looking website, but it's not just the graphics that made it a different experience. What was really important is that every single website was scanned every 5 minutes. We had 1,300 different websites that we would scan continually every 5 minutes, and we would tell you exactly which websites had vaccine appointments available. Now, we didn't actually make any more appointments available, so it was still frustrating, but at least you didn't have to click on hundreds of sites to find those few vaccines available. And it was very interesting. Only through COVID-WA could you see that almost the entirety of the time, there was always somewhere in the state that had a vaccine available. It could have been hours away, but at least you could find it quickly, and then you could decide if you wanted to drive over there. So with this team, we were able to cover the majority of the biggest county in the state within 2 weeks. And within a month, we had the entirety of the state. And in fact, we even knew about more places you could get a vaccine than the Department of Health. And the Department of Health realized that they really needed our data. And so they actually we had a partnership with them, and they created a whole new website. And that website was just to take our data and display it. And so everybody in the state of Washington eventually, when they went to the Department of Health, was getting data from our website. And so there were new headlines that appeared on the news, how some frustrated vaccine hunters are trying to fix a broken system, volunteers build easier, less frustrating system, eligible for a vaccine, Seattle techies create the site that shows the appointments, and my favorite, one website to aggregate them all. That guy was clearly a fan of Lord of the Rings. So we had a lot of mentions. In fact, there were over 30 press articles written about us. And even I was surprised that almost a year after the project closed, we closed when every single one of these dots on here turned green. So that means you can get a vaccine anywhere in Washington state. Almost a year later, we won the GeekWire Awards 2022 Geeks Give Back Award. And it's a little bit hard to see it with this the background. But that award is generally given to companies that have closed $100 million in funding. So it's quite an honor for a nonprofit to be even mentioned by these awards. And so at the very end, we had either what you can call the reunion or the first in-person meeting, because we had never met in person. We had never been part of an organization before. We just all came together, and you see all these smiling faces. And that's because not only did we help a lot of people, but we also had a really great time, and we were all amazed how all these different people could come together. And in that photo, you see not only all sorts of different ages, but also different nationalities. We had people working in the UK as well, in Finland, and we had lots of Russians and Ukrainians. It was a really amazing team of people. So now I'm going to talk more about how Darren and I got involved in the project in the first place. I'm going to go back to how I got into MIT. Now, this photo on the left here, that's actually me in the center playing the violin, surrounded by my siblings. Believe it or not, my two immigrant parents raised 7 kids, and all of us got into MIT or Stanford. And it wasn't because we were rich, it's because we got scholarships. And if you want to understand better how my parents were able to do this, I would suggest you read the book, Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother. Now, Amy Chua's parents and my parents never got together, but I feel like they must have come over on the boat together and compared notes, because every single part of their playbook, like getting the kids to play violin, was part of our playbook as well. Now, when it came time to apply to MIT, this kind of upbringing gave us great grades and great test scores, but of course, we all know that it takes a lot more than that. And so one of the things that I think helped me get into MIT was the MIT interview process. Those of you who aren't MIT alumni, there's an alumni who comes in and talks to you and kind of finds out what kind of a person you are. And I showed up with this magazine. It's not just any magazine. I had actually written an article and gotten it published in this magazine. I'd written a video game for the Commodore VIC-20. And I don't know for sure, but I think that probably played a big part of my getting at MIT. And this is, today we call these passion projects. I didn't do this because I wanted to get into MIT. I did it because I was really interested and wanted to do it, and I learned on my own. But today we call these passion projects, and I want you to remember that, because passion projects actually play a big role in both Darren and Covidois. So now let's talk to Darren and find out how Darren got into MIT. And I'm going to bring Darren back in, but before I do that, I want to have you take a look at the screen on the right side where it says standard score. So this is a screenshot of an application that Darren wrote. And when I was assigned as his educational counselor, that's the guy from MIT that comes and talks to you, he brought that app, and we had an interesting discussion about that. Darren, are you there? I'm going to stop my screen share.
Yeah, I'm here.
Darren, I'm still having troubles hearing, but I'm going to ask you to tell the people a little bit about what you remember of the interview between you and I.
Yeah, sure. Can everyone else hear, or is it just? I guess.
I can hear you barely. I just have an audio problem on my end.
Okay. Well, our interview took place at a hospital, I remember, in Kirkland. I think that was the first time that was maybe one of the first interviews I had for schools, and it was a little bit strange to me because I just didn't expect to be at a waiting room in a hospital. But I remember at the beginning, I don't really remember what we really talked about, but eventually somehow we got on the topic of the app that I was making, standard score.
Okay, sorry, now we've got our audio problem worked out over here. Thanks very much, Dan Morris of Microsoft. Woohoo! So Darren, oh no, now, okay, almost got it solved. So Darren, what do you remember about me asking specifically about your app?
I think you ended up asking a lot of questions just about how I made the app, a lot of the implementation details, and I thought that was actually kind of fun because I think I made the app on my own. I didn't really have anyone to talk about this to, and I thought you asking me all these questions to me was like, oh, this is cool. Someone actually wants to know about how I actually like spent the time writing this thing.
And Darren, did you sense that I was like really probing deeply about your app?
I think in retrospect, I thought about it and I was like, oh, he was probably pretty skeptical about me, but I did enjoy it at the moment.
So part of the educational interview process is it's kind of funny because we don't actually know anything about the candidates. We don't know what their grades are. We don't know what their test scores are. We don't know what their activities are. And it's kind of this game. We have an hour to interview and to find out what's interesting about this student. And I usually just let the students tell me what they're interested in, and I'll follow that. And with Darren, I actually had been teaching computer science, introductory computer science. And so I had a very good idea of what to expect from a college student. And Darren's project seemed surprisingly, suspiciously good. And so I drove down very hard and asked him to explain data structures and algorithms and made sure that this is actually the guy who wrote this code. And I very, very quickly realized that Darren was the real thing. Darren, let's see, let's move a bit forward. And you eventually got into MIT, right?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
And Darren, you probably didn't know, I'm sure we didn't discuss it during the interview. I actually had set up a scholarship fund at MIT. And then later you heard about that scholarship fund. Tell them about that.
Yeah, I think before freshman year, or maybe right when freshman year started, I got like my notifications about what scholarships I received, and then I realized that I got like the George Shue scholarship, which is the one that you set up.
Yeah, so it was great, and we were able to reconnect through that. But like most scholarship donors, there's not really too much of a connection. In fact, every year you write a letter to the donor, don't you?
Yeah, every year.
Yeah, it's a great way for the donors to find out about their scholarship students, but there's actually not really any mechanism for the scholarship providers to communicate with their donors. And so it was a very interesting connection that we had. In fact, when MIT Press came and talked to me, I was surprised to hear them say that they had never interviewed a donor who had been working with their scholarship student. It was completely unheard of. So it was a fascinating adventure working together with you. So let's talk about February 2021, Darren. And you were on IAP in January, right?
Yeah, at that time it was spring break for like the first 2 weeks of February, just because of the pandemic. They switched it over to February. So I was on IAP going on to spring break.
So it was a very lucky timing, because as I saw this thing happening in the news, I sent a quick email to Darren and I said, Darren, you know, this situation looks a lot like this grade scraper that you created. So what Darren was doing is he was going out to the school website and getting his grades, and every time that his grades changed, he would get a notification. And I said, Darren, you know, this looks very similar. Could you possibly go out to these retailers and grab the status of the appointments? Whenever it becomes available, could you tell me about it? And so you tell them how long it took you to write that code.
Yeah, so it was essentially the same type of logic. It was just like I needed to scrape some kind of website for some kind of information and put that in some other location. So in this case, I looked into like scraping like websites like Costco, Safeway, Fred Meyer, QFC, like most of the big chains that just had a lot of pharmacies in the area. And it was like, because I worked on Santa School in the past, it was pretty straightforward. And I think, I forget how many exactly days it took, but like it didn't take too long to show you a prototype.
Yeah, I think I was quite surprised when you got back to me pretty much over the weekend. I thought this was going to be the hard part of the project, and from here was going to be all easy. But it turned out to be that was actually the easy part, because Darren was so talented. Before I move on, Darren, I also want to ask, what did you think of our two backgrounds? Did you think that find some interesting commonalities?
Yeah, well, I think we both came from like an immigrant family. We had a lot of siblings. I didn't have as many siblings as you, but I still had 3 siblings. But I think I was pretty motivated actually, because in some ways we had this like similar upbringing, where we both kind of did these like projects growing up that we were just generally interested in, and then both ended up at MIT. So I thought it was really cool to be able to like talk to you in this way.
That's right. Now, so after you wrote this prototype, you had to go back to school, right?
Yeah, so I think you emailed me like at the end of IEP, and then I had that 1 week of spring break before I had to go back to school.
Did you sense that I was kind of getting desperate, asking you for more and more help as you were trying to go back to school, and that I wasn't getting the help that I wanted?
Well, I definitely did want to help as much as possible, but I think at that point school started to ramp up again, and it was just getting kind of hard to like figure out how to balance the two, you know?
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna start my screen share again, but Darren's gonna hang around, and if you have any questions, Darren might take a look and see if there's something that we could address. But I'm gonna go ahead and start sharing my screen again. So now the point of the story where Darren has written a prototype, and I'm thinking this is going to be easy. So I go and I hit up everybody I know, because I'm a very unlikely person for this story, because I worked at Microsoft. I did all sorts of great tech things, but this was 30 years ago. And so I literally had no knowledge of web development. And so there was no way I was going to do this. In fact, my son had to help me try to get Darren's code running. And I think it took me like 2, maybe 3 days to get this code running, because I didn't know anything about Linux. So it was clear that I could not do this project on my own. So I asked all my friends, and they all told me no. It was some variation of, this isn't a good idea, George, or it's a okay idea, but I don't think anyone's going to use it. Or I think it's a good idea and people will use it, but then that will be a bad thing. So I had pretty much given up hope of running this project when I posted on a group of people who were actually trying to help those elderly and disabled people find their vaccines. And I realized I'd been asking the wrong people. Okay, these people I'd asked, they didn't know anything about how hard it was to get a vaccine. They didn't understand the situation that was going on, but these people did. And so very soon I had a meeting, and this is a screenshot from our very first Zoom meeting. Of course, there is myself and Darren there below. And then on the upper right, I've got my co-founders, Dimitri and Olga, and they had come to me with a website. So they already had a website talking about COVID vaccines, but they didn't have the engine that Darren had written, which would go out to this fairly nice handful of retailers. And so we thought, well, hey, let's get together on that. And then on the bottom right, we have Dan Morris of Microsoft. Now, Dan had won the Microsoft Hackathon several times. And so he was an expert at really making things happen. And I was quite frankly floored by how quickly he wanted to move on this. But he did push us. And within another day, we had the website up. Within a few days after that, we had most of King County, the biggest county. And within a couple of weeks, we had most of the state of Washington. It was really amazing to see this thing move. Now, I want to mention that the reason I have this screenshot is because this was actually used in a press article. So get this, day 2, I call a meeting and I get press to show up for the meeting. Everyone was kind of impressed by this. And it's because I had been watching the news and I was very concerned about the situation. And I saw a press reporter ask a government official, why can't you just show us the appointments that are available? And they told him, it's impossible, right? You got all these retailers, all these different platforms, all these different companies, they're not going to communicate. It's impossible. So I called up the reporter and I said, you know what? We're going to have a go at this. And at this point, we didn't even have a website, okay? But she showed up just so she could see what's going on here. And she wrote an article, In Darwinian Vaccine System, Helpers Step to the Front. It was on KUOW, our local NPR station. And this began a real virtuous cycle of press, because when that press hit the news, then we got more volunteers. And I should say that that both Dimitri and Olga, they brought in a number of their Russian Ukrainian friends who were able to help the website grow, writing code behind the website, connecting it to a real database. And then Dan, he knew a bunch of people in the UK and Finland. It was kind of crazy. We had this team of all these different nationalities, all these different companies. I was just really blown away by that. But we would get people coming to our website because of the press. Those people would volunteer. we would get more coverage, which would draw more news media, which would then rinse and repeat. And so we had a tremendous team by the end. We actually doubled in size almost every 2 days. Those of you who are in computer science know Moore's Law. Well, this is kind of like Moore's Law. We literally had 130 people in less than 2 weeks. Now, any of you who have ever been a manager should start freaking out, because that's far too many people to be given in just under 2 weeks. And so there's some problems that we'll talk about, but this was not just an ordinary group of volunteers. I mean, I had programmers, I had program managers, I had testers, user interface. I didn't actually have a marketing team, but I had 2 volunteers who said, you know what, we need marketing and we're going to learn marketing. And they turned out to be the most awesome marketing team ever to hit a nonprofit, because they blitzed the media in a way that was just unbelievable. So I want to talk more about what were the factors of our success and failure. I would love to say that here are the 3 steps, and you go out and you follow these 3 steps and you're going to have a successful project. But of course, we all know it's more complicated than that. So some of the things that I think helped us were, first of all, we've got COVID. This is the hottest topic in our lives. I mean, pretty much never has there been a topic which every human on the planet had some interest in. And that led us to all those hands being raised. And again, lots and lots of volunteers. We were also lucky because we figured out a way to do this entirely on the web. I know of several other projects that started at this time. One where people were calling pharmacists on the phone, trying to get a hold of them. Of course, they're very busy people, so that was challenging. Or another project where people were trying to work one-on-one, trying to connect people to vaccines, but it doesn't really scale. And with both this project and other projects I'll talk about, it really turned out that technology won out, because it may not have been the best system, but you could process so many people that you could help a lot of people in the end. So that was an advantage. And then, of course, the paparazzi, the press really helped us tremendously. I don't think we could have been nearly as successful without the press. Our little website served 1 million people in 2 months. We had 20,000 on an average day. We had days where we had 50,000 new unique users. I'm not talking about refreshes. Okay, there were like 8 million refreshes, but we're talking about individual users. And then these 2 robots shaking hands, well, that represents a very unique situation in Washington, because Washington State early on decided they wanted to partner with private industry in solving this problem. Now, they didn't reach out to us. They reached out to like Boeing, Microsoft, Nordstrom, all the big players, Starbucks, and we were not on that. But through our connections, we got into that system. And eventually the Department of Health said, you know what, we can't ignore these guys. We have to partner with them. And so they agreed to create a whole new website. We put our data in there. And through that website, we served another 2 million. So 3 million people in 4 months. Some of us were talking about, when we hit that million mark, we were so excited. And somebody said, well, yeah, come on, Amazon gets 1 million users in a day. But yes, did Amazon do that in the first month? Absolutely not. It was pretty phenomenal. Lastly, the first place on there is because there's this thing called first mover advantage. If you're the first person on the scene, you have the product, it's very hard to dislodge you. And we heard about many projects, small projects, 1 or 2 people here or there, and they would start spinning up and they would hear about us and they would say, you know what, why don't we just take all our code and we'll bring it over there and join the team. So there was really only 1 player in the game in Washington State. So let's talk about some of the failures. So one of our biggest failures was our success, and that is this tremendous growth. I talked about the 130 people in a couple of weeks. We had a fantastic communication mechanism called Slack. And if you haven't worked in the last 10 years, you don't know about Slack, but it's a really neat tool. It's kind of like it replaces email and you get instant messaging and you can reach out to your whole team very quickly. Problem is they can reach out to you very quickly too. And those messages, they're like bulletin boards. And so we had full-time developers who would come back from a day of work and there'd be hundreds of messages that they would need to wade through before they could do their work. And it just became an untenable situation. So this galaxy here is because I like to think of COVIDWA as having 2 celestial events. The first was when everything came together in this moment of creativity and we spawned COVIDWA. But just like in a solar system, eventually all of that material coalesces on itself and falls and eventually creates a supernova and it explodes and kills the system. And we had a moment like that too, because we had all these people, and then we got notification that the Department of Health, hey, they're going to take our data. We don't need all these features. We had maps, we had, a whole new version of the user interface. We had different languages. We had all these projects going on with all these developers, and we realized we really needed to just collapse. And so I held the first and only all hands meeting. And I basically said, congratulations, we won. We did exactly what we intend to do. Don't come to work tomorrow. And it was that abrupt. And I still have regrets about how abrupt it was, but it was the only thing that was going to allow us to continue to finish out our mission without losing any more of the most critical resources. The two robots fighting, that's because one of the problems with doing this way, where you're going out to websites and you're getting the data from the website itself, is that the websites change all the time. And so we would have to go out and rewrite the code to work with the new website. But worse than that, I'm sure you've all seen the CAPTCHAs, right? There's this street lamp and it's asking you, where are the stoplights? Now, can anyone tell me, am I supposed to click on just the stoplight or the post too? I don't even know. So this is a very difficult problem. In fact, it's an impossible problem for computers. And so we actually had to have human beings solve those CAPTCHAs for us. Now, fortunately, there's a service, so we didn't have to go out and hire anyone ourselves. So that we had this weird situation. We were trying to help human beings. In order to do that, we had to write a robot that talked to another robot. We had to convince that robot that we were really human beings. So we had to hire human beings to say, yes, we're human beings. So it was a very strange situation, but we had a lot of our small team of developers. We had about a dozen to 2 dozen people after the collapse. And those developers were really, really great. And they got us through all of these different hurdles. If someone wants to ask me later, I can tell them the story of what we basically accidentally launched a denial of service attack with a mistake. Computers and robots can cause some problems. The last problem I wanted to mention is what I call the cow versus the milk problem. Why buy the cow if you can get the milk for free? So our game plan had always been 2-month project. We're going to make this, it's going to solve a bunch of people, solve a bunch of problems, and then the problem will go away, or we'll hand it off to somebody else. Well, the 2 months came and the Department of Health said, well, wait a second, we don't have resources to actually take your code or run it, but if you give it to the data to us every 5 minutes, then we'll do that. And so we ended up being on the hook to keep this data running for 2 full months. We knew that if we ever stopped, then the entire state of Washington was going to be without resources for finding their vaccines. So it was a bit of a problem, but we worked through it and it led to some success. So the last topic I want to talk about is passing the baton. Really, my goal is that just one person out there decides, you know what, I've got this idea for how we can help the community and I want to try it. Or maybe you hear somebody else starting it and you think, you know what, I don't have the skills to do that, but maybe I've got some talent that I can contribute to the project. And I want to mention 4 projects that have spun off from COVID-WA, some successes, some failures. The first one I want to mention is another grade scraper. Now, this app, this is a screenshot from the iPhone App Store. And you might realize it looks a lot like Darren's project. And that's because I met yet another high schooler. This high schooler, his name is Evan Mazur. And it's funny because we never met each other on the project. So after the project was over, I get this email from Evan saying, can you sign this form showing that I did community service for my high school? And I said, what? I thought this guy was a professional developer. He'd been doing some really high level work. So I started working with Evan and mentoring him. And I mentioned how Darren had written this project for the Lake Washington Schools District. And he thought, well, you know what, if Darren could do it for that, why don't I try for the Seattle Public School District, which is one of the largest in the country. And so he has now launched this notification system for students in the Seattle Public School District. So that's a success. And just like in our project, Evan went out and he grabbed some of his friends because, again, it's not something that was easy to do on his own, but with some help, you could do it. A project that I personally wanted to start is to help people find baby formula. I'm sure you heard about this baby formula shortage. So I thought, you know, this problem sounds very similar to COVID-WA. You got a high demand low availability. And the problem was that the internet wasn't the best way to find the information. In fact, I thought the best way was going to be to have mothers take pictures of the stock. So I started a small project with a couple of people, and we surveyed all of the websites and the tools. And we found that just like in COVID, it turned out that taking photos was actually not the best way. It was not actually helping. The thing that was really helping the most was an exact duplicate of COVID. They went out every so often, checked all the retailers for baby formula, and then reported back to whatever people were interested for. And that was actually helping a lot of people. And I mentioned first mover advantage. This website that you see on the screen was not the one that we were going to create. Someone had already beat us to it. And we talked with them, and they didn't need any extra resources. And so first mover advantage means it's their project, not ours. So that was a failure on our part, but in the end, the community got what they needed. So we're very happy about that. It's an example, though, of what people can do. Another one, and I just heard about this yesterday. So Dmitry and Olga, their Russian and Ukrainian friends, they have created a new website, Vax for School. And this is for the many Ukrainian refugees who are coming to the United States, and they don't really understand the school systems and the vaccine requirements. And so this website is, I can't read any of it, but I'm told that it tells people about how they can get their vaccines. So that's a great effort that's started up. And lastly, I want to mention this website, Find Vaccines for Kids Under 5. Jessica Chong, another one of my COVID co-founders, she's a professor at the University of Washington, and she was interested in getting vaccine for kids under 5. And at the time, there was no information really about where you get this. You couldn't just go to CVS and ask when that was going to be available. You had to hear about it from some mom who talked to some doctor or talked to some pharmacist, and they would hear information. And so she figured out a way, she doesn't write code, but she figured out a way to collect this information in a spreadsheet and then automatically populate this map. And so across the entire United States, this map has been filling up with information. People just click on there and then they can see what retailers actually have it. And this map has been so successful that Jessica got a mention in the New York Times for it. So I would definitely count that as another success. So I hope that you, through this presentation, you get the idea that it doesn't matter how young or how old you are. It doesn't matter if you don't think you have the right skills. If you get together with other people and you have a good idea, this really can happen. You can really help your community. I want to again acknowledge both the Chinese Alumni Group, the MIT Club of Puget Sound, and Microsoft for the room. And if you want to contact me, if anyone does want to start a project like this, there's not really a lot of resources. And so if you want help, contact me on LinkedIn. And you can also check out my YouTube sites, MIT eMan and Mighty CS Man. And I'd be happy to do what I can to give you some advice. And now I'm going to stop my share and I'm going to bring Darren back in and we will take questions. Darren, you there?
Yep.
Thank you, Josh and Darren, for the fantastic presentation and discussion. The first, we don't have that many questions, so audience, please send in some questions. So the first question is, did you consider taking COVID national?
Okay, so so the question is, did I consider taking COVID national? And yes, about maybe halfway through the project, once we really had a firm handle on it, we reached out and looked nationwide, and it was really amazing how my developers could find these people. Like they would go out in GitHub and search and find any code that they could find for people who were looking for vaccines. And so we found several people who were doing projects. Most of them were individuals. There were 2 individuals who did a great job, and we ended up working with them. We would both help each other whenever some anti-bot technology would break us. We'd say, hey, are you guys seeing this? And we would work together on that. There was another group in California specifically that was trying to spin up a large effort, and we also worked with them. And we also found out there's some national resources. And so we did look at how to solve the national crisis, and we were working with people. But this project has been kind of funny because it comes in waves, right? Right about when we were at our peak, then the vaccines were starting to become widely available, and the interest was decreasing. And so, like I said, those 2 guys had great websites, and they were very helpful. but we weren't ever able to really establish a national effort. It's also kind of sad to say that the state of Washington doesn't have our code now. And so if they ever get into this bind again, we're going to have to spin the project up again or something like that. Of course, things have changed dramatically. And so even if they come out with boosters in the fall that are completely different, I'm not so sure the demand will be there. We don't really know. Darren, what do you think about some of those questions?
I don't really know if I have anything to add. I agree with everything you said, though. I think you said everything I was thinking about.
Okay.
And also,
so
if anyone has any questions in the room, feel free to wait. Okay, I've got a question right over here.
Yeah, one quick question, like what kind of code did you use for the new inspiring generation that's coming up? Like did you use like Python or C#? And then, what was the hardware challenges that you faced? And the third part of the question is, did you use any AI, ML, like machine learning for
Okay, so there's three parts to that question. If I remember them correctly, first is like, what languages did we use? Like, did we use Java or Python? Second question was about, let's take one at a time. Okay, so the first question about languages. So again, COVIDWA is a really interesting project because, for example, Darren wrote the project in Java to start. And as a community college instructor, I teach Java and actually learned Python as part of this process. And a lot of people are learning Python now. And so as we had more people join the project, well, a lot of them wanted to write in Python. So we figured out this cool architecture where we had this engine that would just run these scrapers, and the scraper could be written in any language. And so we had a little bit of Java, we had a lot of Python. Dan, what were the other big languages? Go, JavaScript. Wasn't there also Go, TypeScript? So we had a lot of languages and we were really very language independent. What was your second question?
The second part was what kind of infrastructure was it like on the cloud, Microsoft Cloud?
Oh, infrastructure. Okay, so the question was infrastructure. How do we run this thing? Well, after my experience trying to figure out how to run Linux on my machine, we initially looked into a number of different cloud services to run the code. And we were very fortunate to get an Amazon engineer who knew all about their services and was able to provide a lot of services. And we had this thing, Dan, what was the name of the Amazon service that we used?
Lambda? We were using Lambda functions.
Yeah, Lambda functions, which again, is really over my head, but it's really cool. You can basically have just a small piece of code remote executed very quickly. So you don't have to spin up a whole machine and pay for that level of services. Third part of your question, I know you were asking about AI and ML.
Yeah.
So no, I don't know of any AI or ML that we used, but I was really always amazed by what the developers were thinking up. And in fact, towards the end of the project, we had this cool idea where we were going to do our own mechanical Turk. There's this thing on Amazon that you can actually go out and hire people to do small bits of work for you. And so rather than having people solve CAPTCHAs, we were going to get them to solve the CAPTCHAs, or even better, they would go out and check if the website was available. So I thought that was really creative. It's not AI or ML, but I thought, along the lines of really creative questions, that was what. Now you also asked me, like, what were the big challenges? And Darren, I don't know, do you want to speak to any challenges? I remember, Darren, we had to bring you back time and time again for a few challenges, like some of the anti-bot stuff, right?
Yeah, for Kroger specifically, as
Not to name
time,
names or anything. So it's not a commercial, okay?
but some of the websites got more and more like bot protected in ways over time. So like they would up their like anti-scraping protocols basically. So it got a lot harder to be able to like scrape something like that, and we had to do a lot of interesting work in order to still get around that and be able to put it onto COVIDWA.
Yeah, and it was an increasing level of defense. They would put up one level of defense, and I remember at one point Darren figured out, you know what, if you just request twice, we get around it. So I mean, those are very simple things, but then they started getting more and more technology, and they started rolling out Akamai, I think it is, that's got really, every level we would have to, figure out how do we get around this one. So it was a constant battle on that.
Yeah, thank you for addressing
Ween King, do you have another question out there?
Yes, I have a question for Darren and from the audience, and I have the same question myself. Darren, how did you juggle MIT and this project? What classes were you taking at the time?
Yeah, good question. So I was taking 5 classes at that time, and I was also a lab assistant for the machine learning class at MIT. So it definitely was like it was really good timing that this happened like right at the end of IEP and right before spring break started. And it was good timing also that they moved spring break to that time, to that first week after IEP, because I think if I started school like right after IEP, it would have been definitely a lot harder to contribute to the project. But a lot of the things I was able to do was during that week of like spring break that happened, and then when school started, it of course like the first few days, first week isn't too bad, so I was able to do what I could. But then, of course, school started to ramp up after that.
Yeah, it was
And
very
what
good timing on
classes
that.
were you taking?
I would also say that, so Darren served as certainly on the start of the project. He was very involved, and then he had to go back to school. So, but we kept on pinging him, and because his scraper actually was a big piece of work. And so we kept on having to ping him, say, there's something wrong with this. And he would just get back to us a little bit. But he was able to, keep up with his classes, and we had other engineers, obviously. And so we just pinged him whenever we needed to.
Oh, that's amazing. That's another question from the audience. Even though you were all volunteering your time, did you have some expenses, for example, for software licenses or cloud time? And how did you pay for them?
Yeah, so money was an interesting topic because we decided early on, we had people working from all sorts of different companies, Microsoft, Facebook, Fox, I can't list them all. And there were conflicts of interest. And so nobody could be paid. Nobody ever earned any money from the project. And but we did have expenses. We had certainly cloud computing expenses. And so we originally thought, we don't want any money. We're just going to pay for this ourselves. And then we became a nonprofit. And normally it's a very difficult process, but we became a nonprofit through what's called a fiscal sponsorship. You just find one of these special nonprofits, and you sign up with them, and you become an immediate project of. We became a project of realized impact. So now we were a nonprofit overnight. And so now we realized, well, wait a second, all of us work for these very fancy companies that will give matching donations. And so for every hour that people put into the project, they got some money. Maybe it's like $25. Even us retirees, a lot of us were Microsoft retirees, and there was a Microsoft Alumni Association, and they also, on a one-time deal for the pandemic, they also created a matching process. So more than half of the money in the project was actually raised by the members itself. And the other half, I was quite surprised. We did put up a donation page, and people were just throwing money at us. We literally several times in the project had to turn the page off because there was so much money coming in. We couldn't responsibly know what we were going to spend it on. Later in the project, we actually started a text messaging service. So you give us your text message and text cell number, and then we'll text you back with the vaccine appointments. And this is a really cool feature. And we started out, and interest, just like everything else, it just like spiked. And we were looking at very large amounts of money that we could be burning through, like thousands of dollars a week. And so then we really kicked up the fundraising machine. We raised and raised, but then just like everything else in COVID, it's like you think you know what's going on, and then all of a sudden things change, and then people didn't need the service. And so we actually had it was fine. The money was a very interesting aspect. We ended up raising more money than we needed. So that's another thing. A lot of people may worry, why, if I start this project, how am I going to pay for it? But it's kind of like going to college. If it's a good project, if you're a good student, there will be a way. Okay, that's not the most important thing to worry about. But thank you for that question.
I have a question for Darren. How did you get so good at writing software?
So when growing up, I played a lot of games with my siblings. And we had a lot of computers at home just because my father left a lot of computers at the house. And I think at one point I realized I wanted to be making games instead of playing them. And that kind of started this like whole chain of events that led to me like programming for games, which then basically refined like programming skills through games. And then that led to like things like making apps through like making apps using the same languages that games were in, and then basically just kind of went from there. So basically, it was games that that made me interested in programming. Very different than as a lot of people would say about video games, I think.
I'll add something to that as some advice to high schoolers who want to be good. And I in my community college courses, I tell people the same thing when they finish the course. If you want to get good at programming, go and explore something that really interests you. Write a game or join a project. You know, all the best developers I've seen, they had something in mind that they wanted to do that they learned all on their own. And that's really the best way to learn is if you and with the internet, you know, you can learn anything you want. I mean, I've got my entire course for Java on my YouTube channel. So that's a great way. And I encourage anybody who's getting into computer science, you know, you've certainly got to get a proper education, but really going out and doing something like this on your own, that's going to really help you learn.
I see you
And
now.
I see there's a question about what's the link for the vaccines under 5. Unfortunately, I don't have a short link for it, and it's like this really long thing. So yeah, unfortunately, I don't have a link for it. But if you Google it, there's also a New York Times article recently. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have a good link for you. Sorry.
So
Question
if
right
I,
here.
Yeah, why is it the retailers are like fighting against you? Did you try and talk to these companies and say, or is it a really adversarial relationship?
So it's a good question. The question is why do the retailers make it so tough? And the answer to that, I'll just say that there were many articles written in Wall Street Journal about how much money retailers are making off of the information that everybody was submitting online. Because they were building huge catalogs of information from people who had never come to their stores before. So I'm not saying that that's the case, but there wasn't many articles written about that.
so you had about 130 people working on the project. How did you coordinate them?
So that goes back to my days at Microsoft partially. So when I was at Microsoft, I did become a group manager, and that I had 70 people and spanning all different aspects of the product. So I was familiar with how to do that. So I at least had a chance and a fighting chance at doing something with this. But the problem is that I started off the team very small, and I actually eschewed my typical management style. And I said, you know what? Nobody's a manager here. Nobody works for anybody. You just do what you think you want to be done. And it worked great for like 2.5 weeks. And then things started getting off the rails, right? Because we had people going in this direction, people going in this direction. And yeah, that's kind of what led to the supernova. But we managed to corral it well enough that we got done what we needed to do. So we used Slack a lot, and Slack lets you have channels. So we had a user interface channel, we had a scrapers channel, we had a front end channel, a back end channel. And so that was at least constrained there. But like I was saying, that communication eventually exploded to be too much. I can't remember the number of the tens of thousands. I mean, we had like over 100,000 messages in the course of our project. Dan's shaking his head at how many messages he saw. Yes.
So on Slack, just in
Got a question here.
You can have both a paid version and a free version. I'm assuming you were using the free version, but I thought there were some limitations.
Okay, so the question is about Slack, and it's true of all the GitHub, Slack, etc. There's free versions of these tools and there's paid versions. Well, another thing that was going for us is we had this COVID thing going on, and all of these companies, also Twilio was our text messaging service. All of these companies had special deals going for people who are nonprofits or specifically COVID nonprofits. And so we got a lot of great free stuff. We got the free best version of GitHub. We got the free best version of Slack. We got a bunch of credits from Twilio. Well, yeah, we really, we could have gone out and applied for like a $10,000 grant from Twilio. Well, it's like, well, what would we do with the money? So this was another case where we really lucked out. That was a key to our success that's going to be hard to replicate in the future. But I would also say that nonprofits do qualify for a lot of discounts. And so if you want to run a project, really think hard about becoming a nonprofit and really think hard about joining a fiscal sponsor is the easy way to do it. And then you can get all these things for cheap.
There are some great questions here. To Josh, Darren, and other volunteers, has participating in this project opened new doors?
Darren, you want to talk about that?
I think it definitely made me more interested in this type of work. I don't know if I can say for sure that like it has like opened a new door for me. Like someone was like, "You did COVID well, here, do this."
So I'll answer. So you know, we frequently hear about serial entrepreneurs, and I never understood this before. It's like after you do all this, why would you do it again? But I totally get it now, because after finishing COVID Law, I really wanted to do it again, right? And so I wouldn't say it's really opened a lot of doors, but it certainly has expanded all of our horizons as to what is possible. So I'm gonna turn the question around a bit and say that's the real impact. For those of us who were in the project, it was really mind expanding.
Wonderful. And another question for Darren, super impressive. What is up next for you at MIT and beyond?
It's a good question. Well, right now I'm basically majoring in computer science, cognitive science, but my focus has been systems engineering. So most of the things that I will be doing at MIT for the rest of my time here is systems engineering. So that's like performance engineering, compilers, distributed systems, all those sorts of things. I'm hoping to try to go to graduate school after MIT. Yeah.
So the last question, did either of you start a nonprofit after this?
So I already partly answered the question. So COVID Want was a fiscal sponsorship project of Realize Impact, another 501c3. And because normally the process to actually start a nonprofit is very substantial. I mean, you have to hire an attorney and file lots of paperwork. And then after you do it, then you got to file lots of tax returns and whatnot. So a fiscal sponsorship was a very easy way of immediately getting access to nonprofit money. So we didn't start anything beyond that.
Okay, we are coming to the end of the hour. Josh and Darren, do you have any final words?
I have nothing, but I appreciate all of you coming and hearing us talk. George?
My words are just go out there and think about what projects in your community could be helped by technology, and either start one or join one. I encourage you to do it. It's a great experience.
And Darren, we appreciate you too. And same for Josh. And thank you to both of you. You are just inspiring. Thank you too to the MIT Club of Puget Sound and Microsoft, Kevin Shang, Lola Bryan, and Dan Morris. Last and not least, thank you, audience. Your attendance support our events. We hope you have enjoyed the event. The recording of this webinar will be posted on the website of the MIT Chinese Alumni Group and the YouTube channel of the MIT Alumni Association. For the MIT community, please join the MIT Chinese Alumni Group for free. You don't have to be Chinese. For the public, please link in with me and message me to be added to our email invite list. We look forward to your attendance at our future events. Let us unite and help one another. We welcome your feedback and suggestions. On behalf of Josh, Darren, the MIT Club of Puget Sound, and the MIT Chinese Alumni Group, we thank you. and hope to see you soon. Goodbye.
Thanks for joining us. And for more information on how to connect with the MIT Alumni Association, please visit our website.